Ethan used to measure his days by the sound of factory whistles and the rhythm of a time clock, a dependable metronome that told him where to be and who he was. But after the plant shut down and the whistles went quiet, mornings became an echo chamber where his own footsteps sounded too loud, and the only constant was the soft click of Rocky's nails on hardwood as a dog followed him from kitchen to porch and back again, tail swishing like a patient metronome of its own, warm amber eyes, waiting for a cue that sometimes never came. Rocky had not always been Ethan's. He'd been a nameless, ripped-in stray with a torn ear and a gaze that refused to look away when Ethan first saw him huddle behind the chain link of the county shelter, and something in that gaze, something stubborn and unbroken, reminded Ethan of the way his mother used to squeeze his hand during thunderstorms and say, "We're small, baby, but we are not breakable." So he'd signed the forms and carried the trembling dog to the truck, telling himself he was rescuing a life, not realizing that on some near-future night, the life being rescued would be his own. They found a routine, the two of them, even in the lean months, morning walks down the cracked sidewalk where purple morning glory spilled over fences like gossip, afternoons of job applications and polite rejection emails, evenings of soup warmed twice, and a single light left on in the living room to make the house feel less like a mouth swallowing itself. Sometimes, when the wind came up from the river and the town smelled faintly of wet pennies and cottonwood, Ethan would throw an old tennis ball down the alley and watch Rocky bound after it with a joy that seemed impossible to manufacture, the kind of joy that arrived like a gift and left like a benediction. On the day everything changed, the sky had that chalky winter look that fools you into thinking snow might be coming, though the forecast promised only wind. Ethan had a printout of his resume folded in the pocket of his coat, a habit he'd picked up as if opportunity might leap from behind a lamppost and demand proof of experience on the spot, and Rocky trotted beside him wearing the faded red collar the shelter had provided, a tag shaped like a bone that chimed against his leash, "Neighborhood." Kids shouting from a yard while their mother called them in, and a distant train dragged its sorrow through the valley. The truck didn't belong on their street. Too big and too fast, a boxy beast wearing a contractor's logo like a grin. Ethan heard it before he saw it, the engine a throaty snarl, and he had a moment, a single, breath-sized moment, where everything slowed, the neighbor's chime suspended in midday, a newspaper caught on a fence post fluttering out a headline about some far-off scandal, Rocky's ears pricking forward, the driver's eyes widening as a vehicle fishtailed on a smear of black ice near the curb, and Ethan's foot slid as he pulled back on the leash, thinking only of traction, only of getting out of the way. Later, he would say there was no time to think at all, only time to feel, the hot exhale of Rocky at his thigh, the sudden absence of leash tension, the deep, guttural bark that sounded like a command, and the jolt of a body hitting his knees with the force of a linebacker, sending him backward into a snow-dusted hedge as the truck's bumper bit the space where his legs had been. The driver wrestled the truck to a stop halfway across the intersection, hands in his hair, shouting apologies that evaporated into the cold air, but Ethan's world had narrowed to the stillness in Rocky's body and the way one front paw lay at an angle that felt wrong, the way wrong feels when it has already decided to live with you. He didn't remember dialing the vet. He remembered hands. His own shaking, the driver's stuttering, Mrs. Alvarez from the corner stepping off a porch with a wool blanket in word that sounded like a prayer pressed into the dog's fur, and he remembered Rocky's eyes, which looked not frightened but puzzled, as if to say, "We had a plan and I changed it," and Ethan whispering, "I know, buddy, I know, I'm right here." Because he could not imagine a reality where here did not include this. Exact heartbeat listening for another. At the clinic, fluorescent light made everything harsher, as if grief had paused, and the vet, Dr. Patel, a woman with steady hands and a voice like knitted wool, took Rocky from Ethan's arms with a promise that sounded like truth. "We're going to do everything." And Ethan believed her, because faith sometimes needs a place to sit down. He signed forms he didn't read, nodded at words like fracture and internal bruising and observation, and sat in a chair too small for waiting, every minute stretching into a decade while the clock stuttered toward a future he could not picture, when Dr. Patel emerged with a tired smile and said they'd stabilized Rocky and would operate in the morning, something unclenched in him that he hadn't even realized was clenched, a small thing, a fist inside a fist, and he said thank you too many times, like someone trying to pay a debt with nickels. That night, the house felt like a theater after the audience is gone, all the echoes still hunting for a body to land in. He left on a lamp in the corner anyway, a ritual he and Rocky had developed against loneliness, and he lay on the couch because the bed was loud with emptiness, and he found himself speaking out loud, telling the doc about overtime shifts and the way the factory smelled like hot oil, about the first time he saw Rocky decide not to flinch from a raised hand, about the difference between being needed and being loved, and somewhere in the middle of that confession he slept, and in the morning he woke with a sentence already formed. Whatever it costs, we'll find a way. The operation went well. Dr. Patel said, the fracture a complicated spiral, but clean enough to set, a mess that could be translated back into bone sewn with screws and patience. Rocky slept under a tide of anesthesia while machines breathed out little lullabies that made Ethan want to cry, and somehow the clinic bill managed to be both proof of mercy and a threat, a number with a comma that made his palms itch with math. The thinness of his savings, the credit card with a limit that had once seemed generous, the side jobs that might exist if he was willing to hop fences and knock on doors. He went home with a medicine schedule scribbled on a yellow sheet and a list of post-op instructions that felt like vows. No stays, short leash walks only, a quiet place to rest. Then stood in his living room and looked at the furniture the way a general looked at a field, pulling a mattress down to the floor and fashioning a nest with blankets and pillows, setting a water bowl within reach, placing the old tennis ball by the edge as if proximity might encourage healing. Friends offered what they could. Denise from the library brought a bag of paperbacks. Pastor Jim left a casserole at the door with a note that said, simply praying. The driver of the truck, a man named Colton who couldn't stop apologizing, came by with a check that felt too tidy for the messy thing it was, and when Rocky came home, groggy and taped together by modern medicine, he wagged that slow, careful wag that dogs use when they are trying to reassure you more than themselves, and Ethan laughed that broken laugh that isn't exactly laughter, something grateful and terrified at the same time. Days became little altars built out of schedules, pills hidden in peanut butter, ice packs and warm compresses tag-teaming the swelling, quiet music in the afternoons when the pain meds made Rocky's eyes go soft and far away, and during those quiet hours Ethan learned the geography of his own fear, where it pulled, where it receded, how sometimes it sharpened into resolve when he was washing bowls or changing bandages. Because love becomes action when the world narrows to tasks. Money did what money does. It ran, and when it slowed down it panted. But something else happened too, something Ethan hadn't expected. The town noticed. Mrs. Alvarez organized a little fundraiser online with a photo of Rocky looking noble and indignant in his cone, and people Ethan hadn't spoken to in years sent $10.20 and a terse message that said, for the hero, while teenagers he'd once scolded for tagging the church steps showed up with a jar of crumpled cash and a story about how Rocky had let them pet him when the mother was sick and the world felt mean. Ethan took a weekend shift sweeping up at the hardware store, then fixed Mrs. Kemp's porch steps for a crisp 20 and a bag of ginger snaps, and at night, when Rocky dozed and the house was candle quiet, he updated a notebook with every expense and donation, each line a thin bridge across a deep ravine. Healing is not a straight road. It is a map with coffee stains and roots that say, try again. But Rocky walked it with a stubborn grace, and when he put weight on the repaired leg for the first time, just a fraction, just a ghost of weight, Ethan felt something inside him hold out a hand to the future like a man stepping off a bus into sunlight. In those weeks, Ethan began volunteering at the shelter where he'd found Rocky, partly because gratitude demanded a direction and partly because the quiet hours made him think too much. He walked timid newcomers, spoke softly to dogs with storm lantern eyes, cleaned kennels with a care that felt ceremonial, and learned the names of the staff who did this holy work every day. People like Mara, who wore her hair in a crown of curls and had a laugh that could light a windowless room, and Neil, whose beard made him look like a maritime saint and who cried every time a hard case went home. You're good at this, Mara told him one afternoon while they watched a pair of brothers, a red heeler and a mutt with a grin like a crescent moon, discover the cosmic joy of a sprinkler. It's like you listen with your whole body. Ethan shrugged, because compliments made him clumsy. I just try not to rush them, he said. Some of us take a while to come out from under the table. Mara looked at him then, long enough for him to look away, and when he looked back she was still there, gentle as a porch light. The first time Ethan took Rocky back to the river path, spring had arrived like an apology, all soft green and scandalous birdsong, and they walked slow, the leash loose, a cadence that said, we do not have to prove anything to anyone. They stopped beneath the cottonwood where everything always smells a little like rain, and Ethan pressed his palm to the scar the surgery had left along Rocky's leg, and he whispered, You saved me. And the dog leaned his whole weight against him the way dogs do when words have to be translated into warmth. Finding work didn't happen like a lottery win or a telephone call at midnight. It happened like everything else in this new life, piece by piece. The hardware store asked him to stay on, then offered more hours, then asked if he'd like to help in the back keeping inventory because he knew how to read a system like a story. Mr. Lambert, the owner, turned out to be the kind of man whose gruffness was just shorthand for kindness, and after a month he slid an envelope across the counter and said, "It's not much, but it's steadier than this circus. And Eddie, because somehow he become Eddie to these folks, the way you become yours again." When people start saying your name with affection, felt something in him stand up straighter. Evenings, he still went to the shelter, even when Rocky didn't need watching every second. He found he liked a version of himself that existed there, the part who could kneel in sawdust and whisper courage into a quivering body, who could match a shy dog with a child who spoke in shy words and watch both of them bloom. The town changed him, or maybe it just revealed him. He became the person who fixed squeaky gates and didn't charge if you were old, who shoveled the walk for the teacher who lived alone, who remembered your father's name when he'd been gone a decade. He saw Colton sometimes, the truck driver, and they developed a ritual in which Colton tried to pay him back in projects. "At least let me build you a ramp. At least let me fix a gutter." And Ethan would point at Rocky, who now ran in a lopsided, joyous gallop that felt like a new language, and say, "You've already paid me in waking up." It would be tidy to say that the accident was a blessing in disguise and that everything after turned to honey, but that would be a lie, and Ethan had given up lies when he brought home a dog who never tolerated them. There were still nights when worry slipped under the door like a draft and lay beside him, nights when the ledger didn't add up, mornings when the mirror showed him a man older than he felt, and there were bad news days at the shelter too, the kind where a carrier came in covered, with a blanket and everyone's voice got very soft. On those days, he went home and sat with Rocky on the porch steps while the sunset earned its reputation, and they shared a silence that was not emptiness but fullness, a bowl that held without spilling. He thought sometimes about the moment of impact, or the moment of non-impact, that split second before the truck where choice doesn't exist and instinct writes the body story, and he marveled at the way love can be so immediate and so deliberate at once, how Rocky had spent months learning that this man would not hit him or shout or leave him, and then one day he spent a breath spending everything he had to make sure the man would get another breath too. Not long after Rocky's final checkup, when Dr. Patel said, "He can be a dog again," and handed over a photo of a tabia that looked like a constellation, Mara asked Ethan if he wanted to help with an outreach program the shelter ran at the high school, a gentle introduction to animal care that was really about teaching tenderness to kids who carried too much weight in their backpacks. He said yes before he could think of reasons to be afraid. And on Tuesday afternoons he stewed in a sunlit room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and pencil shavings, talking about body language and trust, about how patience is not waiting without complaint but listening with intention, about how you cannot punish fear out of a creature, you can only companion it until it grows bored of running the show. He brought Rocky sometimes, because permanence is easier to believe when you can put your hands on it, and he watched the way boys who wore bravado like armor melted into softness when Rocky leaned against their knees and sighed. Once, a girl with lavender hair asked him, "How did you know he was a one?" And he said, "He looked at me like we were already a promise." And the girl nodded as if this explained not only dogs but the universe. Summer found them on the river path again, longer walks now, the kind where time doesn't matter and the air tastes like pine, and Ethan realized he no longer counted his worth in whistles or pay stubs, though he counted those too because groceries require arithmetic. He started counting in moments instead, in small Mercer's tallied at the end of the day like beads, and the beads glowed, Rocky asleep on his foot as he read a paperback with a sun-bleached cover, Mara resting her head on his shoulder during the outdoor movie at a park, and neither of them naming what that meant, the way the hardware store bell made children look up like something magical might happen, the time Mr. Lambert said, "Family discount," and then pretended to cough to disguise the fact that he was a decent man. On the anniversary of the accident, Ethan woke early, a reflex born of grief and gratitude, and he made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and he clipped on the faded red collar that now fit Rocky like a story fits a teller, and they walked to the edge of town where the road turns to dirt and the sky goes a little wilder. He thought maybe he'd feel haunted, but what he felt instead was that high, thin clarity you get after crying, the kind of light you can see through. He sat on a flat rock and told the story again, this time not to the dark but to the morning, and Rocky knows his pocket for the biscuit he always forgot and never failed to carry, and Ethan laughed out loud, the sound bouncing off cottonwood trunks and coming back to him brighter. He didn't have the life he'd planned when he was 25 and sure of everything. He had, instead, a life that fit him, a quilt of a life, stitched from pieces nobody else wanted, a job that left his hands tied and clean, a dog with a consolation in his leg, a town of people who remembered his name, a woman who laughed like windows opening, and a sense, finally, that the person he'd become would be someone his mother would recognize. Sometimes, late and soft, when the house had settled into its nighttime bones and the town's last train dragged its last sorrow past the water tower, he would rest his hand on Rocky's ribs and feel the faithful engine in him, and he would think about how close a thing can come to ending and still choose not to, and he would whisper, "Thank you," and Rocky would twitch in a dream where he was forever running toward a joy that never tired of being found. And when he dreamed himself, Ethan never saw bumpers or ice or the bright, stupid danger speed. He saw a chain-link gate at a shelter, a torn-eared dog who would not look away, and a man who finally didn't either, two small, unbreakable creatures saying yes to each other, and meaning it every day after.